Well, just when President Trump has a big win, a home run, it looks like rhinos in Congress are going to try to block him. We've got Democrats trying to block him. We've got a trip to the Middle East and so much more. To help me go through all that, I have Maureen Callahan. Maureen, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks so much for having me, Stephen.
So some background for my audience. Maureen Callahan, I think you've been on 3 or 4 times. She's a journalist over at the Daily Mail, and I'll make sure to link your recent article down below. She also has a new show, The Nerve, with Maureen Callahan, that is under the Megyn Kelly umbrella, and it's doing very, very well. I'm excited to see how that does for you. I know the difficulty, the uphill battle of getting a show going. But if anybody can do it, I believe it's you. What are your thoughts on this historic executive order where for decades, Bernie Sanders and other Democrats have been saying, hey, the reason you vote for us is we'll lower the cost of your prescription drugs. And then it never happens. It never happens. They blame the Republicans. Sometimes the Republicans jump in on this fight, but at the end of the day, nobody ever really lowers the cost of drugs. Now Trump is saying, I'm just using my authority as president. I'm getting it done. What are your thoughts on that? And then I want to jump into the pushback and the lawsuits that are coming.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating, Stephen. So, the lowering the cost of prescription drugs has historically been aimed at and framed for older Americans who, historically need more prescription drugs. They're older, they get sicker more easily, et cetera. And to have Bernie Sanders, who is well into his 80s, who has been flying around the country on private planes with the likes of AOC, who, by the way, the New York Post on Sunday did an incredible barn burner of a piece. So they went to her district and they talked to her constituents and they said, what has she done for you lately? And they're like, you know what? Nothing. And we try to call her office and nobody ever picks up, and it's open 1 day a week. And if anybody even responds to us, it's a lucky day. I don't understand what she's doing, gallivanting around the country with Bernie on this tour, like they're rock stars, right? Talking about the oligarchy, which now the left is having more infighting because they've suddenly realized that word oligarchy is not landing with the average American who is like, I just want to buy a dozen eggs. Okay. And even that is a stretch. So Trump does this. And of course, what are they going to do? I mean, it's a win. It's one of those bipartisan wins. It's such a no brainer, but we are seeing, again, this is yet another example of the left refusing to get the memo, just refusing.
Yeah, the silence from Bernie Sanders has been shocking to me. I thought he would have said, hey, I wish it could have been us. I've been fighting for this for my whole career. Let's just get this done for the American people. It turns out maybe it was just sound bites for him and something to run on with, running for president. I just think, why would he be so silent? Is he just mad that it wasn't him that got it across the finish line?
I mean, I think there's a lot going on here. I think this may sound tangential, but this new spate of Biden books, and the Jake Tapper, Alex Thompson one is the most recent and the most sort of bombshelly, if you will. I would qualify that, but there is a real recoil in this country now to the gerontocracy and to the career politician. Bernie Sanders is worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. Nancy Pelosi retired with extreme amount of wealth. Again, a career politician. Dianne Feinstein was getting wheeled in, dozing off, and Joe Biden is, the ultimate example of this. And I think also, Bernie had run for president and was boxed out by the DNC. They were like, it's not happening. We're giving it to Hillary. Go away. And I think there's probably a lot of just very human frustration and bitterness. And, what will his legacy be? What will, Ted Kennedy had many problems, but people look at him and they point to work he did as a legislator. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, same thing. What is Bernie's legacy really going to be? Sidekick to AOC? Is that what this is? That's what I think.
Yeah. So, a lot of the American people cheered for this. I've been digging in on some of the people on both sides of the aisle that take money, and I don't know how this gets put into law because Big Pharma has more lobbyists than any other group in America. They contribute millions of dollars to some of these candidates. So Chuck Schumer in New York, 1.5 million. Elizabeth Warren, 822,000. Bernie Sanders, 1.4 million. The dude who was on a crusade to lower your drug prices has taken 1.4 million. Bob Casey, 1.7 million. Klobuchar, 700,000. Mitt Romney, 3.3 million. Mitch McConnell, 2 million. John Cornyn, 1.5 million. And now the majority leader, John Thune, $400,000. How are they ever going to vote for this without giving a middle finger to the very pharma lobbyist that got them put in office?
I mean, if I'm Thune, Klobuchar, and Warren, I'm having my staff go, why did I get such a low payday? Get me more money, What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my office,
Yeah. Why I'm not worth seven figures?
No problem. Again, it's sort of why it has to be done by executive order, right? You just have, because otherwise it will never get done. And you kind of have to give it to Trump in terms of, we're past the first 100 days, but the speed and the decisiveness with which he is doing things and basically showing that, here's the other thing that did not get any attention. And I don't know why, but I think because it would be considered a win for Trump. The last remaining American hostage held by Hamas, Eden Alexander, I believe he's still 19 years old, from New Jersey, was released a few days ago to crickets from the American media. Crickets. Why? Is this not a huge win? When Biden took credit for getting Brittany Griner back from Russia, it was a merry-go-round of big, media appearances and hosannas and hallelujahs. And we saw the footage on a loop of her coming off that plane. And the media is just completely ignoring this. And I think it's such a dereliction. And I think it's just because they cannot abide giving Donald Trump credit for anything.
Yeah. Wow. Good point. Yeah, there was crickets. I was listening to Trump in Qatar. He was saying, we thought this kid was dead for weeks. They told us he was dead. And then suddenly they were like, oh, no, actually, he's alive and we'd like to negotiate with him. It's like a total win, a total miracle. But heaven forbid Trump get credit for bringing home this. It's almost like when the Democrats wouldn't stand and applaud for that little boy who had survived 13 brain surgeries from having cancer. Literally, there's a child. His only goal in life is to be a police officer. 13 surgeries, brain cancer. They make him an honorary Secret Service. Crickets from these people.
I know they couldn't stand and applaud for that. And by the way, a very moving part of that entire scene playing out was, this hardened head of the Secret Service. Forgive me, I forget his name. This boy just throws his arms around him and he's so clearly taken aback, and he hugs the little boy back, and you can see the emotion on his face. These guys have seen it all. And even this guy was near tears. Okay. Nor did they stand for the mother and sister of Laken Riley, who was brutally a nursing student, someone who was truly going to give back to society, raped and murdered by an illegal immigrant. And they can't stand and clap and acknowledge these women either. It was disgusting. And again, but just from a purely tactical brass tacks point of view, I love this for the Dems because history is going to repeat itself in 28.
Yeah. The party of kindness has become what? Kind to the criminal, kind to the illegal immigrant, the gang member, the wife beater. I don't know. It's very strange. Some of their
Stephen, what this comes down to is really pigmentation. That's it. That's all it's ever been. So I just learned about this new act of Donald Trump's. Now he is welcoming white Afrikaners into America because they are facing discrimination in South Africa because they've overcorrected there for their history of apartheid. So now if you're white, you can't do anything unless you can't open a business unless you have a black partner or anything like that. And they just want to just live freely. So they've come here. And now the left is saying that the process is just far too swift. And how are we not, investigating who these people are and putting them through their paces? And why isn't there a process? And, you just can't let people in. You just can't let people in. Okay? Like, they're out of their minds.
Yeah. It's interesting how they wanted to bring in millions of white Ukrainians, right? But now there's 50 people from South Africa, and it's too much. It's too much. Yeah. Okay. The one person, I guess he actually didn't really surprise me that much, but it's Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna. He is now saying we've got to get this into law right now. Democrats have been fighting to lower drug costs for decades. We've got it. Let's be part of the win. Maybe it wasn't our idea. Maybe it wasn't our executive order, but let's at least be part of the win. I have a lot of respect for that. The other thing that Ro Khanna did right, in my opinion, was when we got the Twitter files and we found out that they were rigging the election, that they were spying on the American people, that they were silencing and muzzling people for their freedom of speech. Ro Khanna was the only Democrat that condemned that. And he actually called Facebook and said, is this true? Like, you can't be doing this. This is America, So he stood up there. Is he now going to be primaried? Or like, I think he's doing the right thing, saying like, let's be part of the win because it's good for America.
I think he is their version of Gavin Newsome, who is trying to move his way to the middle because he clearly sees the divining rod. He sees the way the country's going, right? So I think he's got really huge ambitions and is bold enough to sort of break apart a little bit from his party, be the contradictory voice, generate lots of headlines while doing so, and really just sort of testing the waters. I cannot stand Gavin Newsom, and I don't think it's going to end well for him. I really don't. He's not an idiot, but there's something so deeply smarmy about him and used car salesman-like about him. I just don't think he's going to win. You're winning. It's an emotional thing as well. It's not just a political thing when you're at that level. But regardless, I think this is a smart play for Ro.
Yeah, I do too. Maybe Gavin Newsom's like, okay, on the hierarchy of trust, politicians are really low. Who's a little higher than that? The greasy used car salesman. I'll take on his identity, right? Like, his hair is just slicked back. He's a little bit too slick. He's got a new show, but the only people going on his show are conservatives. No Democrats want to go on his show. I think that's kind of interesting. I don't know. I think it's weird.
Well, I also think it's a deliberate attempt. Megyn Kelly has this theory, and I think it's really smart, that like he's using the conservative guests to hone his debate skills and to hone his sort of radar for what messaging will work 4 years from now. That's what I think.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Little bit of cloak and dagger there. That's a good observation. Everyone loves the thrill of playing for a big prize. And in crypto, prizes don't get any bigger than the OG, Bitcoin. Play Crypto.com's Freedom Jackpot from today to July 4th, and you might just land a Bitcoin payout. Each time you trade $50 worth of any token in the Crypto.com app, you earn a chance to win the jackpot. The more trades you make, the higher your chances of winning. Easy, right? And with over 400 coins to choose from in the app, you won't run out of plays anytime soon. Trades made through the app's crypto basket and recurring buy features count the same. So don't worry if you're diversifying your portfolio or just want to schedule some purchases. Now, the Freedom Jackpot's available across the US, so everyone's got a shot at winning one Bitcoin. Sign up through Crypto.com through my link below, and you'll automatically join this limited time event. Don't lose this opportunity to get into crypto with a huge bonus. Isn't that awesome? Crypto.com, they sponsor me. They sponsor Rumble. They sponsor the Lakers. They sponsor UFC with Dana White and all of the big fighters. So this is a really huge opportunity to potentially win a Bitcoin, which right now is trading at over $93,000 a coin. You brought up earlier Jake Tapper, a little bit about Biden's mental stuff. I've noticed in the last 10 days, every single interview or press conference that Senator Chuck Schumer of New York gives, somebody asks him, hey, how did you not see that Biden has dementia? Why did you ignore that he has mental problems? Are you too stupid to see that? Is this on purpose? How did you not know he has banana puddings for brains? Every time he just ignores it, or he says, we're moving forward. What are your thoughts? I think the American people are on to the fact that many of these Democrats just lied about Biden's cognitive abilities.
Well, yeah. And, don't forget, Chuck Schumer was the one who took like a 6-hour, 8-hour car ride down to Rehoboth Beach in the waning day, when Biden was still clinging to power, when Dr. Jill was also still clinging desperately to power, to convince him to get out and get off of the ticket. Somebody went down there. I don't know if it was Chuck. I don't know if it was Nancy. I don't think it was Barack, but like somebody communicated, we know where your bodies are buried and we're going to start exhuming them if you do not get off of this ticket and clear the path. This book, which I read, it's out on Tuesday and it's already a huge bestseller. It's number 4 on Amazon right now. It's not even out yet. So that tells you how deeply hungry people are to get the real story.
This is the Jake Tapper book on Biden's cognitive.
Yes, with Alex Thompson of Axios. It's called Original Sin. And, I just want to give you and your followers like the real story. So in the beginning of the book, there's an introduction, which makes it clear that even though they're telling the truth, now remember, Jake Tapper was on CNN this entire time, and that clip is going viral with good reason, of Lara Trump on his show as his guest, and Lara Trump in 2020 saying, we are seeing a cognitive decline in Joe Biden, and Jake shaming her and saying, you're mocking his stutter and you're not a doctor. How dare you? How dare you imply that there's something wrong with him? Okay. And, not for nothing, another major character in the book is David Axelrod, who's also makes a nice living on CNN and, could have said at any time during his, in his perch at said channel, I know something for a fact. Okay. Just telling you people. So they introduce this book by saying to the reader, this book does not exist as we are in no way attempting to normalize Donald Trump. We are in no way trying to say that his candidacy was legitimate or that any of his presidencies are legitimate. Okay, so that's where they're coming from. And it is a very velvet gloved treatment of many of the key players. And I just columned on this for the Daily Mail. And my assessment, just my interpretation of that, is that these players were sources for these people. And so there was a little bit of favor trading. Like if you're Barack Obama, hey, you're going to write about how I was just like, I can't do anything about this. I mean, I'm just the leader of the party. One of the most popular Democratic presidents ever. I can't do anything about this. Or, if you are Kamala Harris, it's like there's barely nary a mention of you in this book. Like, even though you were right there, allegedly. There are some bombshells, like the wheelchair thing is a real bombshell. That they knew he needed a wheelchair, and his nearest and dearest, this cabal of 5 people who were really running the country said, we can't afford that optic, and we just got to get him out there. And then once the election is over, we can just stash him back away again. Wheelchair, whatever. Nobody needs to see him, and we will get back to the business of running the country. Now, my real problem with this is Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson do not take the media to task at all for this cover up. They don't. And, I was watching very closely because the wheelchair thing broke yesterday, and that was a bombshell. Okay. That's a real, we learn in the book that Biden's doctor, his presidential physician, his physician of 13 years, lied to us, like issued statements saying Biden's stiff gait was because of an open fracture in his foot. And that fracture had been fully healed for years. That is a lie. Lie. Cheap fakes. We're not seeing what we're seeing. So much is like actually not even covered in the book, Stephen. Like Afghanistan, not covered. Who really made that call? That debacle went on for days. People died. 13 U.S. service members died when a suicide bomber went off at Abbey Gate. It's barely mentioned. Okay. What I think was the pivotal moment of the 2024 campaign, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, where he springs to his feet, having been shot, blood streaming down his head, fist in the air, yelling, "Fight, fight, fight." Okay, you're not telling me that the Dems took one look at that and said, we are effed? Like, strength and defiance versus this vegetable we're wheeling out and telling the American people is fresh produce? You know, so there's all of this. And then yesterday, as the wheelchair story breaks, it's nowhere to be found. Like, the New York Times on their homepage, they shoved this story down as a book review, which did not mention the wheelchair story. CNN, Jake Tapper's day job, his home away from home, no mention of this book. Today, I checked again. New York Times, nothing. CNN, nothing. WSJ, nothing. CBS, NBC, ABC, nothing, nothing, nothing. And the legacy media wonders why it's in its death throes.
So, you know, I used to say it's so obvious he has mild dementia or mental decline or cognitive struggles, and I would tell my audience that, like, this is elder abuse. This is elder abuse. Now you're telling me that he needed a wheelchair and they wouldn't give him one?
I find it impossible to feel sympathy for Joe Biden. I really do. He clung to power. You never forget the interview he gave George Stephanopoulos after that debate, when the entire part, like the biggest donors were like, this guy has to go. Like, this is unsustainable. This was a fatal event. And Biden sat there and he said to George Stephanopoulos, not even the Lord Almighty could convince me to leave this race. And even if I lose to Donald Trump Hitler, Donald Trump, greatest threat to democracy from a party that was engaged in this kind of cover up. And he says, well, you know, even if I lose, then, you know, I just feel like as long as I did the best I could, that's all that matters. Okay. His narcissism and his thirst for power, and him and his disgusting, in my opinion, family with their hands out to any foreign government that will give them a payday. I cannot feel sympathy for him. And I don't really fall for the elder abuse line, because I think he and Jill are truly twin souls when it comes to this stuff.
Have you read or heard anything about the Bidens are broke? I've been reading.
Yeah.
That they're like out of money, and they don't have Hunter to cover their bills. They don't have Hunter to bring in money and give 10% to the big guy.
Or his artwork. His artwork.
Yeah, his artwork. His artwork at his $25,000 a month rental in Malibu burned down.
Sugar daddy cut the funds off.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I don't know what they're going to do, because I don't think anyone's going to give him $300,000 for a 1-hour speech.
No, of course not. You know, Hunter is reportedly $15 million in debt. Also, Joe and Jill made the rounds on The View last week. Okay. Where Jill sat there knowing this book is coming out. She had to know what was in it. She sits there as Biden is literally nodding. He's like this, right? And she's going, you know, Joe worked 24/7. Okay. There's no off switch. Like, I would be in bed reading my novel and he's on the phone dealing with foreign leaders and he's reading his briefings and he just never stopped. And it's like, would you stop with the BS? Would you just stop? This book lays out his daily schedule, Stephen. And when I tell you it's less than 4 hours, which they conceded towards the end as they had to. So it's like 12:15 to 1:15 is lunch. We begin the day with lunch. And then 1:15 to 2:15 is desk time. What that means is completely unspecified. 2:30 to or 2:15, 3:15, whatever is POTUS time, which I believe was probably a nap. And then 4:30 is dinner time. And then we're done for the day. We're getting our nappies and our PJs on and we're going Betty Buys. Okay. So, you know, Jill and Joe, shameless to the last moment. And I think what is also going on with those two is they are looking for a big fat book deal. The Obamas got $60 million jointly for their post-presidential memoirs. I don't know what publisher is going to give Joe any bit of money. I mean, he can't speak. Jill is a liar. She is a lying liar. So whatever publishing house gets in bed with her, like, good luck, okay? And I think that she's also looking at Michelle Obama with her Netflix deals and her podcast and, whatever, her four estates and, just the money coming in. And I think she's like, I want that. Like, I want to be that. Like, I need to make that amount of money, and I should, and I don't think it's going to work out for her.
I don't either. You remember how O.J. Simpson killed his ex-wife?
How could I forget?
And then later wrote a book because he was desperate for money called If I Had Killed Her, here's exactly what I would have done and got away with it. Like, I think the Bidens, the only book people are going to want is where they actually tell the truth. Like, if I did have dementia, here's how I would have covered it up. If I was an egomaniac, here's what I would have done with it. If I had used my position of power to fleece foreign governments for money, here's how. Like, that's the only book that's going to sell. You pitching yourself as a great leader is not going to sell.
No, I don't know what the Biden book is. I don't know what the Biden book is. And I don't know what the Jill book is. The Jill book, I really think the Jill book I want to read is, I would love for her bitchy fashion stylist, one Anthony Bernal, who is a key player in this book and who we are told was running the West Wing with Dr. Jill, who insisted that everybody in the White House call her Dr. Jill. Okay.
The stylist?
Oh, yeah. She had a fashion stylist, and he was a really bitchy guy named Anthony Bernal, and he was Jill's gatekeeper, and what he said went, and everybody hated this guy. He was like a bully. He had a litany of sexual harassment claims against him, but Jill called him like her work husband. And he, according to Tapper and Thompson, was one of the people. I mean, this is not a guy who has expertise in anything but putting looks together. And he's in the ear of the two most powerful people. Like, I say it in my column, and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. If there's not a congressional hearing called after this book, if there are subpoenas not issued for people to testify, if people are not held to account for what is, I think, probably the greatest political fraud that has ever been perpetrated on the American people, then we are truly lost. Like, this country is well and truly, like, in trouble.
So Anthony Bernal and Hunter Biden were running the White House. Oh my God!
Well, I'm not saying Hunter was running the White House, but I am.
No, but I've read that. I've read that, like, on the New York Post and others, where, like, he was in every meeting. And
towards the end, yeah.
Yes, yeah, towards the very end.
And you have to think about the self-interest there, right? He wants his father to keep running because, A, I truly believe he hates his father deep down. I really do. And two, that's the spigot. That's the money. And if Joe isn't president, Hunter doesn't get money for nothing.
Ooh, very, very astute there. Speaking of the Obamas, what's going on with them? Several months ago, there was rumors that they were divorcing, and they haven't yet, but it seems like she's throwing Barack under the bus every podcast and show she does. Does she hate Barack Obama, but they stay together because they're known as a power couple? What are your thoughts on those two?
Well, I believe she has very deep, deep rage against Barack Obama. Oh, excuse me. I don't know why my voice caught. I think she has real deep rage. And my theory about her rage is that it's been persistent and long-standing. And, Barack, from a very young age, in his 20s, the political apparatus in Chicago looked at that guy and they were like, that's a star. And we can get him to the White House. We can get this guy over the finish line and we'll make history. And his gifts, whether you agree with him politically or not, are abundant. He's a very effective communicator. He's very good looking. He has charisma for days. Okay. And he's smart. And so what I'm saying is he's basically all the things Michelle is not and possesses all the gifts she does not. And, she's always bitching and moaning that he dragged her into the White House. If you're telling us you're this smart and you didn't see this guy's ambition coming at you like a freight train, it does not line up. Okay. One or the other is true, but it cannot be both. And, so he drags her to the White House, and then he drags her into the history books, and he drags her into multi-millionaire status. And he drags her into purchasing 4 estates all over this country, one of which they are building from scratch in Hawaii. And all this woman does is bitch and moan about him and about her life and about the White House. And like last week, she was bitching on her podcast, which nobody is listening to because it's terrible. And this is a terrible look right now when people are really struggling, okay, to put food on the table and gas in their cars, and they're worried about their jobs and they're worried about their 401ks. And this one over here is bitching that even though she lived in the White House and she had a fully subsidized staff and she had a private plane of her own, I did not know until this little bitch sesh that the first lady gets her own private plane, and it's called Bright Star. Okay, she tells us how awful it was, and she couldn't believe that she had to pay for their groceries. Like the rest of us, okay? The electric bill is covered, the gas bill is covered, the White House pool is covered, the bowling alley is covered, the screening room is covered, the state dinners are covered, you're covered, you're good. But she's bitching about that. She's bitching that, like, if she took her girls on the first lady's plane, she had to pay the equivalent of an airline ticket to get them. I'm sure it was like a coach, so it's just like she's a complete ingrate. She has absolutely no sense of proportion. She has absolutely no humility or wonderment at the way her life has unfolded. There's none of it's there. And this is, again, it feels emblematic of the party as a whole, which is just bitter and angry and mean and upset. And they're blaming everybody else when really it just requires like a good hard look in the mirror.
I wonder, just everything you shared made me think like maybe one of two things. Like, number one, maybe she just really hated being dragged into the limelight. Maybe she's an introvert and just hated it. But again, how did she not know this would happen based off of her husband's political ambitions? But number two, part of her complaining is about wealthy people, houses, her childhood, how poor they were, that her mom told her to not trust people that took too much. I wonder if there's a part of her that hates herself because she's become the thing that her mom and dad complained about the most. I don't know.
These are very interesting points. So to address your first point about perhaps she was an introvert, I don't think that's true because she now has a podcast and a YouTube channel. Okay. And she published several books about her life, at least two. And she used to go on the late night talk shows all the time. Like she would go on Jimmy Fallon and dance. She loved it. Okay. She loved it. And she loved going on the cover of Vogue. And she loved people like the media telling her she was the greatest first lady since Jacqueline Kennedy, if not surpassing Jacqueline Kennedy, which to my mind is sacrilege. Okay. And as for the wealth thing, I think it's extremely hypocritical. Now, if she really has a problem with it, give a lot of it away. There is your answer. Just give a lot of it away. And there's this weird, and Barack said this too. I remember he was talking to a bunch of Wall Street people. I believe it might have been in the run up to the 2012 election. And he said to them, I do believe at a certain point you've made enough money, right? So saying that there should be a cap perhaps on the amount of income any American can generate through their own hard work, innovation, or talent. Clearly, he no longer subscribes to that, because we're approaching billionaire status. So we're, like we're skydiving or whatever that thing is with Richard Branson on Necker Island, a private island. So whatever, And on the contrary, you've got Trump's approach, which feels very refreshing and very American, which is like, I like people who work hard and make a lot of money. I like that. I think that's a good thing. I like success. I like to be surrounded by confident, successful people who also happen to be attractive. Like I like the show of strength. I like what that says to the world about who we are and what we value. And like, it feels kind of refreshing. I think people are sick to death of being lectured by these. And at this point, Michelle Obama, she's a celebrity. She's really grinding her legacy into the dust. They're sick to death of being lectured by the Oprahs of the world, the Gayle Kings of the world who just went into space. I don't know if you know, I am now an astronaut too. So you're lucky you're talking to me, frankly, because as Gayle King says, have you been? I mean, if you haven't been, I can't talk to you. They're sick of it. Like, who are you to tell me I should limit myself and my goals and ambitions. Like, take a hike.
Yeah. That just reminded me, there's a funny video on the internet where he's like, try dating somebody who used to date an astronaut. Like, oh yeah, well my other boyfriend went to the moon. What have you done? Yeah. So now Gail King, she's an astronaut. I can't get her to come on the show ever since going to space. But
you know what? The only thing I can say, Stephen, is do your best to hitch a ride. Next time, because it is rarefied air.
It really is.
Mhm.
Final thing. So the Forbes list of billionaires that comes out every year.
Mhm.
99% of those people, they don't want their name on that list because
Mhm.
they don't want people knowing about their money. They want to be private about their money, how
Mhm.
much they make, how they spend, how they donate. There's only one person that ever complained that their number was too low as a billionaire. Could you guess who it might have been?
Too low as a bit. Who would complain about
There's
that?
only one person who wanted their name, and then they would complain, the number's not right. You're too low. I want to be known as
Well, it
richer.
sounds like Donald Trump.
It is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's the only person. The Forbes 100, he was the only one of the other 99. They didn't want to be on there. He would call Forbes every year. You make me richer. Put my name higher up on the list. He would literally call and complain. And I only know this because one of my marketing mentors, Dan Kennedy, which was a very wealthy man, he worked with Donald Trump, and he heard this. He would say, "Oh, they're cheating me. They're cheating me out of money. I want my name higher on the list." He's the only one of the 100 that would complain that his number was too low.
Well, that's really funny because this is a way back deep cut, but back in the 80s when he left or was caught having an affair with Marla Maples while he was still married to Ivana Trump, Ivana's camp was leaking to, I believe, one gossip columnist, and Trump was leaking to another, and then Marla was leaking, and the Post got the scoop, and it was an iconic front page. And it was a photo of Marla and I believe Donald. And the headline was "The best sex I've ever had." And I think that was Donald Trump's favorite headline of all time. That's Donald Trump.
Yeah. Same thing when he was included on a Playboy cover. He was just like, yeah, something I did. They called me. I said yes. So it's interesting. I'll end on this, but when Mitt Romney of Utah ran for president, he was always trying to hide that he was worth $200 million.
Mhm.
And people hated the fact that he had money. But then Trump comes along and he just, oh, I'm very rich. I mean, even this week, he's like, I have a friend, very rich, very fat, very successful, complaining about the weight loss shot, he just loves to be known as surrounded by wealthy people. I just say own it. You got it. Why not just own it? So anyway, just such a difference. But going back to the Obamas, I do wonder, though, if there is a part of Michelle that is like, she feels like she betrayed her mother by becoming one of those people that took too much.
I had an audience feedback on, because I did this recently on The Nerve, a segment on Michelle and all this rage. And, her mother died like a year ago in May. And it seems like they were very close. I mean, she had her mother in the White House with them for, I think, all 8 years. And somebody said, I wonder if she's going through a kind of really traumatic parental separation from her mother, and if she's experiencing some sort of very complicated grief. And it would kind of explain, I mean, this may sound superficial, but I don't think it is. Her personal presentation right now is extremely juvenile. Like, it's very arrested. Like, she wears these two pom-poms on the top of her head. Like, her hairstyle, she's styling herself like a 12-year-old, and she's kind of bitching and moaning like a 12-year-old, like a very emotionally immature, unsort of realized person. And I think that there could be really something to that, and I think, she said she's in therapy, and I think she maybe should consider either a different form of therapy, like maybe cognitive behavioral, or or find a different therapist, because right now she's unloading her psyche on the American people, and we are not equipped to deal with it. We've got our own problems.
Yeah. Well, I can personally recommend EMDR. It's great therapy. So
what is EMDR? What does that stand for?
So, oh gosh, I know it has something to do with your eyes going back and forth. So, I've been through this. I'm not ashamed.
There's no shame in it whatsoever.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to process something because then you don't have to lay that burden on your wife or your spouse or a friend or something, right? But basically, you move your eyes back and forth. They have like a paddle, or sometimes they have like little electric vibrations. And what you're doing is you're getting your brain to go back and forth between the left and the right hemisphere as you process, like, okay, what about this feels true or whatever? And something about it kind of helps you find the center, and you go, oh, I'm making too big of a deal of this, or I need to take this more serious. I don't know. It was really interesting. Yeah. I found it to be very helpful.
Well, I would add that to the list of things Michelle should look into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fun conversation. Tell my audience how they can listen to your show.
Yeah, you can find The Nerve. We have our own YouTube channel. We are on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the socials. We are out there, and we are always, teeth bared. We're coming at you.
All right. I'll put those direct links down below. Thank you for
Thanks
coming
so
on.
much.
I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Same to you, Stephen. Thanks so much.